To call to order the School Innovation and Turnaround Committee. May I have a roll call?
Ms. Beebe? Here. Ms. Beebe is present. Mr. Bennett? Mr. Bennett is absent. Ms. Bopey?
Here.
Ms. Bopey is present. Ms. Bradford?
Here.
Ms. Bradford is present. Ms. Dastug? Ms. Dastug is absent. Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio?
Present.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Hill? Ms. Hill is absent. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee is present. Ms. Orange Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is present. Mr. Romer? Mr. Romer is absent. You have a quorum.
Let's begin with the first agenda item.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding item 4.1.
May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Bradford, second by Mr. Lee. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 3.1 on page 9. Consideration of a status report
May I have a motion?
on types 2, 4, and 5 charter schools. The department recommendation is to receive.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mr. Gio, second. Second by Ms. Bradford.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Bradford. Is there any discussion on the item? We have some public comment. Any board discussion? Mr. Gio?
I'm just curious, within this context, how are expectations measured against goals, performance type things within these evaluations?
Superintendent?
For no differently from how they are for traditional public schools. In other words, there are annual targets set, the targets that are measured on the school performance score, and then, those schools hit the target, hit the target. There are different measures built into the authorizing process when you're renewed on your charter. We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Any other board discussion? We have a few public comment cards. For the record, Janet Bean, who's no longer here, has asked that her written comments be submitted for the record. Next public comment, Margot Phelps. Carol McCall. Ruthie Frierson. Okay. All right. Any board members opposed? The motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 3.2 on page 21. Consideration of a report on types 2, 4, and 5 charter contracts and requests for amendment. Department recommendation is approved.
May I have a motion? Motion by Ms. Bradford. Second by Mr. Garvey. Any discussion on the topic? Anyone opposed? The motion carries. Next item.
Item 3.3 on page 31. Consideration of the Charter School Performance Compact for types 2, 4, and 5 charter schools. The department recommendation is to approve.
May I have a motion?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Garvey, second by Mr. Dastug. Can I, Dastug, sorry. Any comment? Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Oh, we have a public card. Veronica Brooks.
Hi, Veronica Brooks, LAPCS. Make this short. Louisiana Association of Public Charter Schools would just like to extend our support for the Charter School Performance Compact. In exchange for the autonomy and flexibility to innovate, charter schools face the highest levels of accountability, as you all have talked about already today. And so it's very important and it's vital for schools to have a clear set of expectations, as well as transparent and objective oversight processes by which they're measured. So we appreciate the LDE and the RSD's efforts to make the compact clear, transparent, and fair. And both the LDE and the RSD have executed a strong outreach campaign to garner feedback from school leaders. And the document went through several iterations before the version you have came before you today. And we can tell you that it is drastically improved, so we really appreciate the department really reaching out to folks to make sure that it was the best version that it could be. And while we still look forward to the LD providing maybe some more non-regulatory guidance for various indicators. Overall, we believe that the compact is an extraordinary step in ensuring that charter schools continue to be held to the highest of standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Any opposition? Oh,
No,
Ms.
I'm not
Hawkins.
opposed. I'm just curious about, is this improving something that we already had in place?
Yes, this is effectively unifying the state's process statewide with what the Recovery School District had begun to put in place for Type 5 charter schools, which is a consistent policy that addresses a clear set of domains, sets up clear expectations for an annual review of all types of charter schools that the state authorizes. And so it is an expansion of something that we have newly started in the Recovery School District.
Any other questions? Anyone in opposition? The motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 50, item 3.4, consideration of the framework for the charter school closure and transfer process. The department recommendation is to approve.
May I have a motion?
So moved. I'd like to also,
Wait, let me just recognize it. Motion by Ms. Dastuk, second by Mr. Garvey. Ms. Dastuk.
and I just really appreciate the work that Mr. Gang and others did, and reaching out to the very individuals who have been charged and asked and have taken on the challenge of, taking these schools that are closing. So I've got a lot of good feedback from those individuals, and Mr. Gang, once again, great job.
Ms. Beebe.
Okay, and I don't know if this is the item that addresses it, but it would appear to me that's what it's about. With the RSD charters and the opportunity for them to opt back into the Orleans Parish School Board, that's this item? No?
No, that's a different item where schools who are eligible to return can return. This is setting up a process for determining when a school should close and how it should transition to a new operator.
Anyone opposed to the motion? The motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 3.5 on page 54. Consideration of the 2013 request for applications for types 2, 4, and 5 charters. Department recommendation is approved.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Garvey, second by Mr. Gio. Is there any discussion on this item? Any opposition? Discussion.
I just have a comment.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for this, because I think some of these changes are things that we've had issues with, and I appreciate that we are dealing with them very directly.
With no opposition, the motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 59. Item 3.6, consideration of the 2013 request for local charter authorizer application. The department recommendation is to approve.
Call for a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Garvey, second. Second by Mr. Gio. Mr.
I
Garvey.
have a question, and I guess I would direct this to the superintendent. If I missed it, please tell me where it is. How will we revoke the authorization that we will give to these local charter authorizers if we decide that they need to be revoked because they haven't been doing a good job?
You will receive annual reports as to the student achievement. The law specifically allows for BESE to, and actually spells out in pretty specific detail the procedure by which BESE takes over or considers failing operators and the failing schools that exist within those failing authorizers. So it is fully within your authority, as you are the authorizer of this authorizer, to do it at any time. This is not a process for oversight of those organizations. That actually has already been passed by the board in a previous meeting. This is the consideration of the request for application for groups to apply, such that we would be on a timeline for those authorizers to be approved by later this spring, and thus themselves to authorize schools starting for fall of 2014 if that is to happen.
Okay, so, and you said we already passed the rules regarding how we would revoke an authorizer?
The regulations for local charter authorizers were already passed at a previous meeting, the bulletin that covers the local charter authorizers.
Can you summarize how we what steps we have to go through to revoke somebody?
Sure, it's a 3-year cycle for, and not dissimilar from the charters as they exist now. In fact, everything, both the request for application as well as the oversight process, is entirely based on the way that we do charters, which is to say that there are academic measures that are either progress or status-based. The board receives an interim report, and so throughout the course of the term, the board is welcome to intervene or can intervene to revoke a charter based on, if there's significant levels of negligence, terrible levels of performance. However, given that the term is 3 years, it's likely that you're not going to see academic outcomes from the schools until such time as the 3-year term has passed. At that 3-year term, the board reviews the schools for academic outputs as well as across other indicators, including organizational indicators, and receives a report and a recommendation similar to what the board receives on a charter school, and then the board makes that decision at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Beebe?
Okay, Superintendent White, getting back to the charter authorizers, so for them to participate, do they have to have like a plan whereby they have 5 charters, or they can then implement one and then move towards 5 or more, or is there a limit to 5 charters?
Why don't I ask the team to come up? There is a plan for 5, so I'll ask Dave Lepkowitz and Raphael Gang to come up, and they can share some specifics in brief. But there's a plan for you're required to get to 5. The plan initially doesn't include your plan for each of the 5 schools, but why don't we hear from the...
Yeah, the law requires that an authorizer commit to authorizing at least 5 schools in a regional labor market area. That is a minimum. It doesn't impose a cap in terms of cannot exceed more than 10 or some other number. But part of the plan that they'll be submitting to us as part of the application process is delineating out, well, what's their plan for 5 years in order to get up to that number, or where will they be at the end of their term of their contract in terms of growing that. What's their plan for authorizing? Is there a specific kind of school that they're looking to authorize in that community? And what's their rational basis for doing that, for that approach?
And so this is just outlining the framework, the schedule, which they should have their application in and that their plan.
Exactly.
Are there any more questions? Thank you. Is there any opposition to this motion? Having none, the motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 5.1 on page 122. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 126 Charter Schools, Section 2709, Enrollment of Students, Lottery and Wait List. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
Mr. Garvey, would you mind assuming chair seat?
Not at all.
Any changes?
Okay, do we get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as notice of intent.
Motion, do we have a second?
I'll make a motion to approve. It looks like we have some revised language, so let's go ahead and I'll make it. Why don't we hold on it till we hear what this revisions are? I'll withdraw my motion.
And this is item, what item is this?
Well, it's a bulletin language. I'm withdrawing.
Oh, we skipped the RSD report?
Yeah.
We did at the beginning.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, we do have some amendments on here. I think, did everybody get a copy of the
We
amendments?
just got them, so I want to read it.
You want to read through it? Okay, let's give the board time to read through it. Oh, sure, sure. Okay. Ms.
I'll make a
Dester, your
motion.
motion is to
I'll make a
approve
motion
as
to
amended
approve as amended,
and
yeah.
and
This
presented
creates
by the
a
department?
one-year pilot, correct?
one-year pilot, is my understanding. Superintendent?
Thank you.
Oh, we need a second? We have a second by Mr. Guillo? Yes, we do.
I know that this is an issue that you probably received a fair amount of feedback on. I'll just tell you that many of us have been in long discussions with many of our friends and partners about this, Ms. Romer, Shirley, and this has been for years, I think, a brewing discussion in New Orleans, and really the question is a very difficult one, which is that we've created this enrollment system that tries to have a simple kindergarten through 8 and 9 through 12 system, so that kids only enroll and have these moments of choice at the pre-kindergarten or kindergarten year and at the 9th grade year. And if you start alternating those patterns, you create inequitable access. So we've got a nice system of equity and choice. The problem with that is, in part, that we know that even those transition years from 8 to 9 sometimes can hurt a kid growing up in a difficult circumstance and their chance to get to college on a continuum, for example. And we know that a K-12 system actually could work, and if you really extended it through college, a K through college system really could work well. So some charter operators have said to us, we'd like to take the 8th graders from our charter schools and have them feed into the 9th grades that we run also. Others have said, but if you do that, then you're giving priority over other kids. And so we're faced with this question of what outweighs what? The access of all kids, or the fact that it could really benefit some kids? And I should be frank with you, I'm not sure there's this perfect answer on this. In fact, I know there isn't. Our values are this: maximize equity, and 2, try to find whether there's innovations that could show us whether this K-12 type system could work. What we've come to you with is a process where we would allow in those applicants who come to us and say, we've got a history of getting kids through college in a K-12 type environment, who would allow them some preference for some of their kids for 1 year. We would then come back to the board and say, okay, in the 50 kids who got this preference at such and such school, they were reading at this level in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, et cetera. They were this percentage high poverty, this percentage special education, and this looks to be the result in 9th grade. We would also be able to say, this was the comparative disadvantage in the rest of the system. In other words, this is how many kids applied to the 9th grade from outside who may have gotten it otherwise but didn't. And here's what the impact on them was. And we would give you evidence a year from now as to what the results of the pilot were. You would then be required, as a board, to reauthorize whether the pilot continues. So we're trying to put safeguards on the potential systemic risk by limiting the number of groups, by limiting the number of kids within that group, and by limiting the year to just 1, and by providing transparency. At the same time, we think we should go ahead and do a pilot because we think that the idea of a kindergarten through 12 and ultimately kindergarten through high school or through college system actually is an innovation worth trying out. Thank you for the time.
Superintendent, you said that in the pilot program you're going to limit the number of schools involved in the pilot?
Well, just inherently in that it requires an application, and the terms of the application you see described here. It shall evaluate factors including the applying charter schools' past demonstration of success in preparing at-risk and low-performing students for college and career, and the submission of an innovative proposal to utilize the enrollment preference to further this success, effectively meaning that if enrollment and this consistency has been a part of you getting kids through high school and college, then it would be worth considering that past record in this application process.
And I ask because some of the feedback that I've heard is coming from people who are concerned that this pilot would be so big that it will, during the pilot year, limit the access of children that are in K-8 schools. And I didn't think about what you just pointed out here, was that if you limit the number of schools that can participate in the pilot sufficiently, then it removes that problem. And I was wondering if you have an estimate, is it less than 50% of the schools that you think would be participating?
I think it's less than 5% of the schools.
So a significant number of remaining seats will be available for high school students potential high school students to choose from.
Yes, this is a pilot. Now, we're not limiting it to one group, but we are saying that it is a true pilot, and to me, a pilot means a very small piece of the system, piloting something in a limited way, rather than a large group in a committed, long-term way.
As a point of clarification, will you have enough results by January of 14?
Well, I think we'll know at least an indication of who the kids are and who the kids aren't. Because we have this central system, we'll be able to look at, from a randomized perspective, who are all the kids who chose it number one. And if you've got a priority and you stayed, you'll see a certain kid profile. And then we'll also be able to compare it to the kid profile of those who prioritized it number one and didn't get it. Second, we'll at least be able to see first semester credit accumulation in a year's time, first semester GPA, explore score, and so on. So we'll have some indicators, yeah. And I think it's worth limiting it to this, because I do think that to some of the points that Mr. Garvey may be alluding to, there is a risk. I mean, to be clear, in other words, if you were all of a sudden to establish these feeder patterns, and it turned out that a school was not appropriately using its enrollment relative to others, all of a sudden you'd have some selective feeder patterns, some not selective feeder patterns. We have one app to get rid of that kind of selective system, you know, it's kind of random standards one way or the other. So we want to keep standardization of access and at the same time have a limited pilot.
Okay, Ms. Jones?
I was just going to say, I think I'd be remiss to say that I haven't sort of fielded lots of different feedback from I think charter operators in New Orleans who both had concerns and others who were very optimistic at the idea of innovating in this area. I just wanted to say that I think this is one of those issues that is a bit complex. On the one hand, I do think in New Orleans we just need way more examples of K-12 transformational to and through, you know, having the opportunity to sort of see kids all the way to college. They're serious. It is a major challenge given the challenges of our system and given the track record of certain schools to do it. This could be a very exciting pilot to see what we learn. I think on the other hand, there are the concerns that I do think this 1 year addresses, which is the ability to really come back and look at the cohort of students and to really see what are we learning about them. I would just love to also, you know, as we learn this year, which I think is going to be very, very exciting, I also think it's important to recognize that there could be long-term consequences that we should also be thinking about this year. For example, as a high school improves, which will happen, does that cause any? It will change, of course, the overall parent interest in that school, which then will potentially could cause new problems in terms of access to that school. So I think there's a issue that I think there are issues that could get addressed in 1 year, but there are probably other issues that we need to basically have our minds wrapped around. But this 1 year is the year where we can learn what those issues down the line can be. Yeah.
Ms. Beebe?
I would just want to point out, some time ago, maybe a couple of months ago, there was an attorney here who raised objection to a vote that we had taken about the lottery. I think it dealt with La Francais, and I guess my question to you, Ms. White, I'm sure you've explored this, or would we be non-compliant with law? And again, you know, looking at those students who were not a part of the lottery, they might have a strong desire to get into one school, and then they locked into the school that they're assigned to. And maybe I'm missing the picture altogether, but it kind of locks in those students who would want that lottery experience, and that's, I'm just communicating my concern if I'm understanding what is being discussed here.
They could opt out. In other words, they don't have to go to the 9th grade. They could choose from all the other schools too.
But then how do we address those wanting to get in? I mean, it looks to me as if we're locking in a select group of students, which may take away those seats that students...
Well, I don't know. I don't know if we know that. I mean, and here's why. Number one, I think one thing we'll discover is that if you want to go to a school in New Orleans, you're pretty much likely to get one of your top 3 choices, which to me means that probably in these situations, a lot of those ninth grade kids already would be the kids coming up from that eighth grade. So that's one thing. But secondly, I think we're going to learn whether or not what you describe is true. We'll see. We'll have a lot of comparisons with this pilot to be able to say, well, in this school, only 20% of kids from outside this charter group got in. In the other school, that wasn't the case. So we'll be able to see it.
Okay, so with the compliance issue that the attorney raised a few months ago, are we non-compliant with law as it relates to the lottery approach?
This is the Southern Poverty Law Center's
Yes.
issue? No, we're compliant with the law. Yeah, we're very sure of that.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Here.
I support this belief because, as Mr. Orange Jones said, there are very strong feelings and pros and cons about doing this kind of policy. But I think we need to recognize in New Orleans, and luckily for public school children now, that the time period between 8th and 9th grade is a period where a lot of students make different choices. It's just part of the culture in New Orleans, is that a lot of students make choices around, and often their choices different from the school that they are currently in. It's just part of a New Orleans kind of tradition. So I think setting up this kind of environment where children in our charter schools can exercise that same kind of opportunity and decision, I think it's great. And this is sort of a measured kind of approach to seeing what the real desire is out there. So really, I think, Ms. Jones, I know that you worked very hard on this, and I think appreciate your efforts, and Mr. Garvey too. So.
Okay, any further comments? Hearing none, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 125. Item 5.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 126 charter schools regarding charter school applications and oversight and management. The department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Mr. Guillo, we have a second. Ms. Jones? Do we have any questions on this item?
I do. Before we
Superintendent?
end this, I want to thank the portfolio staff, the whole gang, Marion, Raphael, David, Dave, Holly, Adam Hoff, the whole team. They did really a tremendous job. And also I want to thank Aaron and Bridget for the work that they did on Bulletin 741. I know that it was a difficult day today, but we didn't really get to talk about a lot of what they have done. They worked tirelessly with people in school systems on the very specific natures of these rules. And if you had to imagine, Bridget really had to walk through with administrators in school systems and help understand how to either erase or rewrite what literally is probably a couple hundred different little regulatory provisions. So I thank both the policy team and the portfolio team for their good work in this with this meeting.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Lee?
I too appreciate that. It was a lot of work, and I think it's been a long day, and I'm glad, Mr. Superintendent, you pointed out the staff members that caused us to have to be here so long today. but they did it well. They really did. And it was a lot. It was really too much for one day, but it went well.
Ms. Destu?
I think we're calling for a bulletin break, perhaps. Is there any remaining bulletin that has not been totally revamped, rewritten, and represented to this board? Is there anything left?
Mr. Romer called for doing away with 741 altogether.
Well, I think we
take
put
that up
that
now?
one to bed. Is there any more bulletin? What should we expect going forward?
Bulletin 666.
Mr. Romer only had one person that agreed with him, and she's not paying attention. It's his sister.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Do we have any further questions? Hearing none, do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Do we need a motion to adjourn, or do we?